We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
If you buy gas for your car, heat your home, or even run a business that requires electricity, this Joe Biden energy crisis is going to impact you. But is it merely a confluence of random factors that led to this environment of high prices and scarcity? Or was it a series of seemingly paradoxical blunders that inevitably and inexorably dragged us towards this point? Well, to help us fathom the stupefying depths of decision-making process, we're joined by economist and author, Mr. Andrew Moran. Thanks for being here, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, I think what amazes people the most is the contradictions and paradoxes involved in the Biden energy policy. So supplies are low at some gas stations, and when you can get it, the price is skyrocketing. And yet the administration has started looking into shutting down yet another pipeline. Apparently there are plans in place, that there's plans being looked at, which, as we all know, is government speak for, it's going to happen. We just don't want to tell you about it. How does this make sense?
It doesn't make any sense. I think you can just end this interview right there because that's the answer. It doesn't.
Thanks for being here, Andrew Moran. It makes no sense. Goodbye. No, please carry on.
But, you can't really be surprised from this administration. This is an administration that thinks if you don't count things causing inflation, you won't get inflation. This is an administration that insisted there was no inflation happening, but then now it's skyrocketing. This is an administration that said that trillions of dollars in new spending will be zero cost to taxpayers. Turns out it's going to cost trillions of dollars to taxpayers. So everything the White House is saying and doing doesn't make any sense in the slightest. So I'm not surprised at all that they want to dismantle a portion of another pipeline, the second one in 9 months, in the midst of a global energy crisis. What the heck's going on in the Oval Office?
Well, speaking of oil, I want to ask about Biden and OPEC, the oil-producing countries. Now, on the one hand, you have on the domestic front this shutting down of pipelines, this vehement anger against anyone who wants to use fossil fuels. And on the other, you have Joe Biden practically begging OPEC to ramp up oil production output. This, again, makes no sense to me. Andrew.
I don't know what to say. It's comical and frustrating at the same time. In a recent article of mine, I call it that he wants to make OPEC great again. So I think you would call it MOGA, I believe it would be called. But if he wants more crude to produce, why not just encourage domestic producers? All I hear from the administration, including recently Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, they're just demanding OPEC to ramp up production. When OPEC made that announcement recently, she was saying, "Oh, how dare they? They don't want to play ball. They don't want to help us in the middle of a crisis." Why can't they just say, okay, America's oil and gas sector, we need you, produce more, turn on the taps, do whatever it is. So they don't know what they're doing again. I mean, are they looking at any of the data? Can they just put aside their trying to appease the green zealots in the US government and the electoral base? I find it interesting also is that last year you had a situation whereby the Cushing, Oklahoma storage facility, it was running at nearly full. They had to use ships to transfer oil across the globe. Today, it's the complete opposite. You have Cushing running on empty because every bit of oil is being consumed right now. Isn't the administration looking at these numbers? I know the market is. I know I am a lowly little writer writing about economics. I look at this data all the time, and I'm thinking, doesn't the White House know what they're doing? Don't they see what we're seeing? What's happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with ideology. You say that they could ask domestic producers to ramp up production, but they'd rather have it happen overseas just so they can stick to their climate change promises that they made at COP26, for example. Now, speaking of COP26, when half the big names of the Democratic Party went to Glasgow to laud themselves and their green credentials, on private jets, I might add, they pledged to go green, cut carbon emissions. Now, I came across an article from the very left-leaning Guardian of all places from 2011, quoting studies that said natural gas could cut emissions by 50% within 2 years. But the problem was, as pointed out by the Guardian, is that any money that was invested in exploiting natural gases would be taking money from renewable research. And so therefore, it was doomed not to happen. So it seems to me that all of these promises being made, that 50% reduction in emissions could have been completed a decade ago if it weren't for the politics of renewables. Now, what do you say about that from an economic standpoint?
Well, I'd be sure to first point out that the U.S. does consume a lot of natural gas, and you actually see in the numbers the emissions coming down. Trump, when he left the Paris Accord, the U.S. was the only major advanced economy to see greenhouse gas emissions fall. Why? Because they produce and consume a lot of natural gas. But yeah, I've been writing about natural gas too for many years, and the problem is it's energy efficient, it's plentiful, and it was cheap. But it's been demonized so much in recent years. Some jurisdictions are going as far as banning its use in commercial buildings like California, although, it's tergiversated in recent months because they're running low on energy. But when it comes to economics points of view, this is where the green movement and the free enterprise system have coincided. On the one hand, you have an abundance of natural gas, and it was cheap before its enormous gains. On the other, the emissions from the natural gas are much lower compared to something like coal and crude. So you see this basically on the two data points that the market was already ditching in favor of natural gas because of how cheap and abundant it was. Plus, the U.S. has an immense amount of natural gas, meaning it doesn't have to rely on Russia and other foreign countries. But the problem, the climate cultists and the radical left in Washington want it all. They want windmills and solar powers or sitting in the dark. There's no in between for them. Now, natural gas is always referred to as the so-called bridge fuel. It's called that because right now, if you want to get to the green economy, you have to slowly transition to something like natural gas because of how prevalent it is and it has lower emissions. But they don't want that. They want to go from the benefits of fossil fuel right to a windmill, which obviously we've seen this happening. It doesn't work. So, from the economics point of view, you go based on what the market is telling you. But the problem is that the government intervenes so much, it's really difficult to see where the market would shift toward.
Now, let's talk about the costs of these green policies, Andrew. We hear a lot about how, for example, electric cars are the future. Folks buying gas cars, they're getting penalized through taxation all over the world. Now, setting aside for a moment that the production and disposing of these heavy batteries are an environmentalist nightmare that seems to be ignored at all corners, can statists really control the economic levers to the extent of destroying the traditional car industry?
Yeah, I alluded to somewhat in my previous answer, but this is a bit of a complicated issue. It's difficult to gouge, if the market is naturally shifting to electric vehicles or if the public is being nudged, which is a favorite tactic of many of the statists. The problem is that the government has all these incentives, all these tax credits, all these subsidies going to companies producing EVs, and then the companies who buy those EVs. And that's essentially how Elon Musk got rich, how he became.
It's easy to be a successful enterprise when you have 50 billion in government subsidies behind you.
Yeah, Milton Friedman, he said that the biggest enemy to the free enterprise system is free enterprise itself, because they want the easiest way to get the cash, which is, it's understandable if it's there. But, whatever the case, companies will go to where the money is. You have BMW, you have Ford, you have GM, all these automakers are transitioning to electric. It's just like the case with the natural gas. The market shifted to this bridge fuel because it was cheap. So if oil is too expensive, cost too much to fill up a tank of gasoline, and electric is cheaper, consumers are obviously going to make that move. It's just difficult to determine if the government's interventions are bastardizing where the market is going toward. So I'm sure, though, however, the market would eventually go to EV. It's just that the government, once again, just rearing its ugly head.
Andrew Moran, thank you ever so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to Liberty Nation Radio, heard across the Radio America network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. And remember, you can tune in for Liberty Nation from 2 to 3 p.m. Sunday on KBKW 103.5 FM and 1450 AM, the talk of Grays Harbor. Coming up soon on the show, we'll be talking liberty and figuring out why social justice is no justice at all. But next up, we have longtime host of Liberty Nation Radio, Tim Donner, for a special Say What segment. Don't touch that dial. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.